But the other things, I mean, I was burned. I had a building collapse on me. Several times I've had, either a ceiling or one time the entire roof collapsed on me. In fact, twice that happened. One time, just that sixth sense, the voice of God, I say it was, told me, you need to, pull these guys back. I had my firefighter and a driver right there, and just something said, we need to get out of here now. And I grabbed them and just started backing up as quick as I could. And the whole, thing was lofted up and it fell down in, and that's actually, the second collapse that I was in. It was really bad. We had gone up to some apartment complex up off of 161 and MacArthur, and we were first in. And my firefighter Sean Reddish, when we first attacked the fire on the bottom floor, apparently his air bottle was leaking, and we knocked that down. And I came out, and he said, Captain, I got to get another air bottle. So by that time, Engine 9 was there. I was on Engine 11 that day, and Engine 9 was there. And so I grabbed the firefighter, James Kraft, off of that, and we went up to the second floor to, see if it penetrated into the second floor. Open the door, pitch black, can't see your hand in front of your face, and so I know it's at the very least smoke is in there, probably fire. And go in, and he's pulling hose at the door. He's about 15, 20 feet behind me pulling hose, so I can have enough hose to advance. And all of a sudden, I mean, it went from pitch black to fire all around me. The roof had collapsed, and I'm not hearing, but they're calling a mayday on the outside, telling everybody to get out. And James is sitting at the door yelling, and I could hear him yelling, but I mean, it was hard to, because everything was still falling. And whenever the thing fell in, it knocked the hose and the radio out of my hand, so I couldn't call for help. And the hose is your lifeline. I mean, it not only helps you put the fire out, but it helps you get back out if you can't put the fire out. Well, when it knocked the hose out of my hand, I couldn't find it. And I couldn't find my radio to call for help. And I'm sitting there saying, oh, my heavens.
How'd you get out?
And I just took a minute and said, okay, Lord, if this is my time, then if not, you got to help me here. And I reached down and I not only grabbed the hose, but I grabbed it at the right place, and I had the nozzle basically right there at me, and so I knew which way I needed to go, and I literally had to fight my way back out. And James said later, he said, man, I thought we were fixing to go to a funeral. Oh. And the crazy thing was, the next day we were supposed to take my daughter up to college, because she's starting college at University of North Texas the next day. We were taking all her stuff up there. Mm-hmm. And so we stopped back by that fire, and it's all overhauled now, and my radio was down on the bottom floor.
You find it?
And it was just a hole, but it was it was burned up. But I found what was left of it. It was all melted and stuff and in a pile. But it was down on the first floor. Well, that had happened whenever I was on the second floor, but there was nothing but sky above where that radio was.
How many times did you come close to death?
Oh, I don't know, Richard. I was in another fire down on Westwood, and we went in, and early on in my career, we had a guy named James Presnall get killed. And he got killed because I think they were a little bit too aggressive. Irving is a very aggressive fire department, and I was aggressive. But Presnall went in, and he went for the fire instead of pulling the ceiling above him to make sure that the fire wasn't above him. Okay? And so I always made it a practice to make sure that I was somewhat safe. Now, it didn't always work, because if it's pitch black, you can't see, then, you don't always know. But I tried whenever I could to make it safe. On that fire on Westwood, we went in, and we get there, and the house is just blowing and going. It's on fire. And we don't know, and there's nobody there to tell us what the deal is, And so, there's a fire hydrant right there close, and so my driver's connected to the hydrant. We went ahead and take the line and go in, and my firefighter is a guy named Mike Suzuki, and real go-getter, and he grabbed the hose, the jerk. I mean, I usually like to grab the nozzle because that's where the fun is, You know, but in any case, but he grabbed and he's wanting to go in, and I'm saying, Mike, we're pulling that ceiling before we go further. And we were about 10, 12 feet inside the thing when all of a sudden it explodes.
Boom.
You know, come to find out, some painters had been in there, and it was cold, it was wintertime. Some painters had been in there using lacquer thinner to clean the cabinets, to strip the cabinets down. Didn't turn the pilot out on the gas water heater, which was right there in the same room. They had 2 5-gallon buckets of lacquer thinner just boiling over with the fumes, you know. I don't know if you're familiar, but fumes will literally come over the top and go down the thing. Well, when those fumes went across the floor and hit that thing, then it flashed. You know, it burned them. They took off to the hospital. Didn't say hi, you know, anything to anybody. Fortunately, there's a guy out mowing his yard, you know, about 3-4 houses over, and caddy corner, and sees, you know, the fire, calls the fire department. You know, so we get there, like I say, and don't know what's going on. About the time we go in there, had we not started to pull ceiling, okay, then we might have been hurt really bad, right, been deeper, because we could see where the majority of the fire was, and had I let him attack that, then we might have been blown up. As it was, we were lifted up and knocked down. You know, but, and when we went in, all the bricks were on the house. When we came out, they were laying on the ground because it had literally moved the walls out about that much, you know, all the way around the house. And so it was just one of those things, by the grace of God, that we survived. So how many times? I don't know. I was pretty aggressive, you know, and more than once.
Well, you probably have a good idea how many injuries you've got from the fire department, from one of those fires.
I don't know. Definitely more than a half dozen, you know.
Okay. Yeah.
Just one thing or another. Some, you know, some minor, some worse. You know, whenever I hurt my back and that falling in that hole, I ended up going home that night, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Well, but in spite of your injuries, your work record was pretty good.
Well, it depends on who you ask. You know, I was the president of the union for 10 years, okay? And so I butted head with 2 fire chiefs. I had, you know, 2 fire chiefs that loved me, and the current fire chief, you know, I mean, we get along great, but they're good fire chiefs. If we had fire chiefs that were dishonest and lacked integrity, then I butted heads with them. You know, I mean, to me, if you can't trust a fireman, you can't trust anybody. You know, I based my life, and I raised my kids like this too. I said, you know, I base my life having to trust that guy next to me. If I can't trust what you're saying, I can't trust you with my life. You know what I mean?
I do.
And we had a fire chief that said, well, we can just get stuff, and he would tell them that he was buying buying this type of hose, and he'd buy that type of hose, and he didn't mind, you know, at the very least stretching the truth, you know, instead of being totally honest.
You couldn't trust him.
No, you can't trust him. And how can you work with somebody like that if you can't trust them? You know? So I was instrumental in trying to get 2 fire chiefs fired, and so the last one, he actually put me off, you know, trying to fire me because of it.
He put the union president off the clock?
Well, for that one, I wasn't president anymore.
Oh, okay.
This was after I'd stepped down and somebody else was president, and I mean, I was helping. But I went to a union meeting and I spoke out and said, he's done this, he's done this, he's done this. And one of the assistant chiefs was at that union meeting. And this assistant chief called me in, you know, and started sitting there trying to say, well, you've done this. And I said, no, wait a minute. I haven't done anything on duty. I said, everything that you're talking about, I did off duty. I said, in off duty, I have freedom of speech. Said, on duty, I'm Captain Ken Boozer. Off duty, I'm Private Citizen Ken Boozer.
Now, weren't you the youngest fire department chief in Irving?
No, not chief, captain.
Captain, sorry.
Yeah, and I made captain quick. I made captain in 8.5 years, okay? And you got to spend 2 years in every rank, minimum, all right, by civil service law. And, I mean, there are a couple of exceptions, but in any case, I was just very fortunate that things hit just right. I spent the most time, other than captain, as a driver, and that was, in between paramedic school, and I loved my partner, and I would have stayed a driver, but my partner, because I loved working with him, but he says, Booze, he said, I'm not going to be here forever. He was an older guy, and he said, I'm not going to, it won't be long before I retire. He says, you need to look around and see who's promoting. You need to take those tests. And so I did, and so I got promoted off of the first time I ever took the test, up through captain, and made number one on all of them. Whenever I made lieutenant, I made number one on the raw score, but they counted seniority in there as well. And another lieutenant, I had been there 2.99 years. He had .0001 points more seniority than I did.
That hurts.
Oh no, it was fine because I still got promoted just a couple of months later.
Okay.
So
That's good. That worked out.
Yeah, it worked out.
How did you manage to get involved with the union?
Well, initially, I worked on committees, helping rewrite the Constitution and everything. I write very well, and so I felt like that was some way that I could serve and stuff, and I didn't want them voting on stuff without me attending and knowing what was going on, so I would go to the meetings. But then that first chief, of the two chiefs that I was telling you about, the first chief that I was telling you about that I was instrumental in, that I was a president whenever he got fired, he decided he was going to privatize the fire department. The ambulance service, and take it out of the fire department. Well, I was familiar with how poorly some of the private ambulance services matched up to the fire department run ones. The fire department run ones just had a whole lot better quality care and people, that were providing care. And I said, that's not for Irving. And so I got involved in trying to prevent him from doing that. And after I did that, then the guys said, oh, you need to run for president.